We'll see if the power goes out again. Most of us probably know Leviathan as that one creature that's mentioned at the end of the book of Job. What you may not realize is that Leviathan is mentioned in a handful of other places in Scripture as well. The long passage in Job chapter 41 is the longest section. I mean, how many animals get a whole chapter devoted to describing them? There's not a lot of those, right? In the book of Proverbs, there's like those 2 verses on ants. So I don't really know of any comparable passage other than chapter 40, where God describes all of these other animals, right? But I want for us to look at how Scripture talks about Leviathan. And what you may or may not be aware of is that Leviathan is a name, right? But it was the name of a dragon that was well known during Bible times to the Israelites. Leviathan was actually a dragon from Canaanite mythology, and he was part of their legends and their mythology. And in Canaanite mythology, Leviathan, also known as Lotan, which is a less cool sounding name, Leviathan was a 7-headed dragon who lived in the sea, and he was symbolic of chaos and destruction. And whenever Leviathan appeared, bad things happened, right? And that was just, there's a little bit more to it than that, but not really. And in Canaanite mythology, you have Baal who comes along, and Baal defeats Leviathan, and it's this whole big deal, right? Obviously, Scripture does not condone any of that nonsense, right? So why do we see Leviathan show up? Well, I think it would be probably no different. I'm not likely to do this, but it wouldn't be all that different than if I used a chupacabra as an illustration in a sermon, because South Texas, right? But I'm probably not going to do that. That might not be the best comparison. But it's something like that. It's something along those lines. Just because it's being mentioned does not mean that there's actually this dragon out there, right? At least not a literal dragon. I want to look at a couple passages just to kind of show you the way Leviathan gets mentioned a couple times. Look at Psalm 74, verse 14. Psalm 74, verse 14. You'll notice in this passage, it's a praise of God. Look at verse 12. Yet my God is king from of old, who works deeds of salvation in the midst of the earth. You divided the sea by your strength. You broke the heads of the sea monsters in the waters. And then it gets more specific. You crushed the heads of Leviathan. You gave him as food for the creatures of the desert. So, it mentions here something that might be a little surprising. It mentions the multiple heads that Leviathan has, which kind of fits with what we're just talking about, that he's this creature with 7 heads. Obviously, there's no real creatures with 7 heads. So that should hint to you that this is something that doesn't exist in reality, okay? If you turn the page, or a few pages, over to Psalm 104, Psalm 104, verse 26, you get this strange little verse. Start in verse 24. How numerous are your works, O Yahweh, in wisdom you've made them all. The earth is full of your possessions. This is the sea, great and broad. There the creeping things are without number, creatures both small and great. There the ships move along, and Leviathan, which you have formed to play in it. It's pretty weird. Scripture actually uses in many different places the sea as a metaphor or as a symbol for death and bad things that happen. And this is because, think about where Canaan sits. It sits right on the coast of the Mediterranean, and the Israelites were not seafaring peoples. They didn't make a lot of ships. And there's only a couple times in Scripture where we read about them creating ships. And if you remember, it never went well when they did. King Solomon created ships a few times. That didn't always go so well. Jehoshaphat tried to make ships. That didn't go well. And, of course, Jonah famously got on a ship. And that really didn't go well. So they have this, when you see the sea mentioned, especially in the Psalms or the wisdom literature, and sometimes even in the New Testament, think about the book of Revelation, the sea has this symbolism to it. And Leviathan is this creature that's associated with the sea and associated with all these chaotic and evil things, right? And what's interesting is that in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, they're going to translate the word Leviathan, the name Leviathan, with the word drakon, which is the word dragon. And that's what Leviathan is, right? He's this dragon. There's another instance that might intrigue you, where Leviathan is mentioned in the book of Job. Now, of course, God talks about him in chapter 41. But Job is the first person to mention Leviathan, and he mentions him in chapter 3. In his very first speech, right? The book of Job is composed of all these speeches between Job and his three friends, and then this other dude who shows up for a couple chapters, and then God gets a chance to speak, and then all of these people decide they're done talking. But in his first speech, Job chapter 3, verse 2, Job answered and said, "Let the day perish on which I was to be born, and the night which said, a man is conceived. May that day be darkness, may not God seek it from above, nor light shine on it. Let darkness and shadow of death redeem it. Let a cloud dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. As for night, let thick darkness take it. Let it not rejoice among the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. Behold, let that night be barren. Let no joyful shout enter it. Let those who curse it curse the day, who are ready to rouse Leviathan." And you wonder, why is he mentioning Leviathan here? Well, remember what I said? When Leviathan shows up, bad things happen. So what Job is saying is, it would have been better for someone to have called on Leviathan so that that day would have been eaten up and it wouldn't have ever happened. I wouldn't have been born. So Job is using some of this language himself. And God is going to bring this language and this creature back into the conversation at the end of the book, right? I want you to think about something. In the book of Job, in the very first chapter, we meet someone who hasn't gotten a lot of screen time so far as in the Old Testament. We meet someone that our English Bibles will call Satan. And it's not actually a name, it's a title. And what the title Satan means is the accuser. He's the accuser. And this accuser shows up in God's counsel, and he does exactly what you might expect him to do. He accuses. In verses 6 through 10, it says, it was the day that the sons of God came to stand before Yahweh, and Satan, the accuser, also came from among them. And Yahweh said to the accuser, "From where do you come?" Then the accuser answered Yahweh and said, "From roaming about on the earth and walking around on it." Then Yahweh said to the accuser, "Have you set your heart upon my servant Job? For there is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil." There's nothing you can accuse him of. He's blameless. He turns away from evil and he points his face toward good. People don't do that, but Job does that. There's nothing to accuse. But Satan, the accuser, has something to say. He answered Yahweh and said, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge about him and his house and all that he has on every side? You've blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But send forth your hand now and touch all he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." Then Yahweh said to the accuser, "Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only do not send forth your hand toward him." So the accuser went out from the presence of Yahweh. And of course, we know what happens. All these horrible things happen. He loses his possessions. Most significantly, he loses all of his children in these tragic accidents. And in chapter 2, verse 1, it appears that the accuser came among the sons of God to stand himself before Yahweh once again. And this time, Yahweh says the same thing. Have you set your heart on my servant Job? And he says in verse 4, "Skin for skin. All that a man has, he'll give for his life. Send forth your hand now, touch his bone and his flesh, and he'll curse you to your face." And he's looking for some excuse, some reason that Job might have to accuse or to curse God. He's looking for something to accuse him of. And as we go through the book, Job proves his character to be blameless. Not perfect. But he has nothing that the accuser can accuse him of. And yet he goes this entire way through the book and he never comes to understand the truth of what has happened to him. He never understands what's been going on in the background. And the things that happened to Job, and, when you read these first couple chapters, it feels pretty unfair, doesn't it? That God would have this kind of conversation with the accuser, and when he asks for a chance to try to get you to sin, that God would tell him that's within his authority. And Job just goes this whole time and he never knows what has happened to him. Or does he? I would like to suggest that when God brings up Leviathan, he is sharing insight to Job into what has happened. Not all the details. He doesn't need to know all the details. But he tells him something that changes Job's perspective. Before, you remember there's 2 speeches from God. And after the first one, Job calms down. But he's not ready to fully be quiet. But after that second speech, something changes in Job's perspective. And I want you to turn to Revelation chapter 12. I know I don't have you turn to Revelation very often, do I? But I want you to look at Revelation chapter 12 and look at the language that's used here. Revelation 12, verse 3. Another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his body were 7 diadems. And you can jump down to verse 9. It says, the great dragon was overthrown, or thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation, the power, and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, he who accuses them before our God day and night. This is the Drakon, the dragon, who has 7 heads. And in a chapter or two, he's going to be seen standing on the seashore, and another beast is going to come up out of the sea, and it's going to look pretty similar to him. 7 heads, 10 horns. And we're told that this imagery specifically refers to the one we refer to as the devil or Satan, the accuser, which I don't know if you've noticed, but the Bible really doesn't give us a whole lot of information about him. There's not a lot of scriptures that talk about Satan. But here in Revelation, this imagery of a dragon is used once again. And I would like to suggest that when we go back to Job chapter 41, that God is telling something to Job beyond just telling Job that he is a powerful creator. He's already told Job about his powerful creation in his first speech. He told him about all of these different creatures, and he ends by talking about the horse, and at the end of chapter 40, he talks about the behemoth, which I don't know what that is. It might be a hippopotamus. That's a pretty standard theory of what it might be. That's a different conversation. But there's this creature, there's these other creatures that God describes that sound like pretty natural creatures. They don't all, like Leviathan. Look at chapter 41, verse 18. It sneezes, flash forth light, and its eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of its mouth go burning torches. Sparks of fire leap forth. Out of its nostrils smoke goes forth as from a boiling pot and burning reeds. Its breath kindles coals, and a flame goes forth from its mouth. That's a dragon. That is a dragon. It breathes fire. There's not a lot of things that breathe fire. Dragons breathe fire, okay? And what is he saying? Let's read the first 11 verses of this chapter. I want you to read it from the perspective that Leviathan is a symbol for Satan. I'm not saying Leviathan and Satan are the exact same thing, but that it's imagery, okay? God says, can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook? Or press down on its tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in its nose or pierce its jaw with a hook? Will it make many supplications to you? Will he speak to you soft words? Will it cut a covenant with you? Will you take it for a slave forever? Will you play with it as with a bird? Or will you bind it for your young women? Will the traders bargain over it? Will they divide it among the merchants? Can you fill its skin with harpoons or its head with fishing spears? Place your hand on it. Remember the battle. You will not do that again. Behold, his expectation is a lie. Will he be laid low even at the sight of it? No one is so fierce he dares to arouse it, contrary to what Job mentions in 3 verse 8. Who then is he that can stand before me? Who has given to me that I should repay him? Whatever is under the whole heaven is mine. Now, he doesn't give Job any insight into the wager that God and Satan make in chapters 1 and 2. He doesn't tell him anything about Satan's specific involvement in that whole process. And yet, God reveals something important. That everything is under his control. When we read the first 2 chapters of Job, we see that even though Satan has great power, it is still subject to God's. And God is still the one who holds the reins and who remains in control of everything. Satan must ask God for permission to do the things that he does and to create these tempting situations. And it is only under God's watch that these things are permitted. Now, that might raise to us a lot of questions about the goodness of God, if he can allow such things to happen. But what God calls Job to do is to trust him, because everything remains in God's hands. Everything remains under his control. It doesn't mean that the things that have happened to Job are secretly good things. It doesn't mean that all of the pain and sorrow he's suffering is meaningless. But he calls for Job to trust him, because as much power as Satan has, and as much as it seems that he is in dominion, remember, think of this from Job's perspective. Think of this from our own. That we can't do anything to touch Satan. We have no power over him. We can't cut a deal with him so that he'll stop tempting us or stop bringing horrible things into our lives. We don't have the power or the authority to do that. And yet God does. God has the power to overcome and overtake him. And now I want to show you this last verse, Isaiah chapter 27, verse 1. Isaiah 27, verse 1. In that day, Yahweh will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, with his fierce and great and mighty sword, even Leviathan, the twisted serpent. He will kill the dragon who lives in the sea. There is hope. And we see a glimpse into that in Revelation when we see this whole scene play out. That God accomplishes victory over the dragon, that he defeats him soundly, and that battle is predetermined. God tells Job, you're not going to go up in battle against him. You can't do that. And if you try, you'll learn your lesson, and you're not going to try that again. But God, and God alone, can wage war, and it's barely a war. Does Isaiah 27 verse 1 really sound like a war? No, this is God the dragon slayer. And he comes and he will slay the dragon, and he will free us forever from his power, from all of the pain and sorrow and death that he has brought into the world. And that gives us so much hope, knowing that we don't have to worry about that. We don't have to think about it. The dragon, as far as God is concerned, has already been defeated. We're just waiting to see the battle take place. And I'm not talking about some crazy thing in Russia, that's not what I mean. It's a spiritual battle. And God promises that he will destroy the serpent. I hope that gives you hope. And I hope you all have a very good week. I love you all. If you have any need, please come while we stand and sing.